On today's episode of Finding the Killer, we are looking at an interesting case where a young female named Stephanie turned up dead on the side of the road, strangled to death. A young male named Jake was driving home from a friend's house when he found Stephanie strangled to death on the side of the road. When the police began their investigation, they obtained 2 samples of DNA for testing. Sample 1, which was a hair found on Stephanie, and Sample 2, a swab that was used to isolate DNA under Stephanie's fingernails because it appeared as if she had been in a physical altercation with her killer, trying to defend herself. Now let's talk about our 4 suspects. Suspect 1 is Jake. He was the one that found Stephanie on the side of the road. Although he reported having nothing to do with her murder, he was still considered a suspect. Suspect 2 is Blake, Stephanie's ex-husband. He was considered a suspect because he ended things with Stephanie after he found out that his best friend Anthony had an affair with her. Suspect 3 is Michelle, Blake's mother. She was seen in an argument with Stephanie the day before where she reportedly threatened to kill Stephanie if she would not leave her son Blake alone. Suspect 4 is Anthony. He's the one that had an affair with Stephanie. The DNA samples were isolated and ran through a process called gel electrophoresis. All of the DNA was amplified for 2 different VNTR loci and run on separate gels to create DNA fingerprints. The DNA fingerprints were compared with the suspects to identify the killer. After running the gel electrophoresis, here were the results. We will cross-reference both sample 1 and 2 with each of the 2 loci to find out whose DNA matches the sample and find our killer. To begin with, we're going to look at sample 1 in both loci 1 and 2. Sample 1 was the hair obtained from the crime scene. After looking at locus 1, we can see that sample 1 matches both the victim and Blake. Now let's shift and look at locus 2. At locus 2, sample 1 matches both the victim and Anthony. However, since the victim was the only consistent match for both loci, the victim's DNA is the one that matches the hair found at the crime scene. Now we're going to look at sample 2 and compare at both loci. Sample 2 is the sample of the DNA that was collected when swabbing under the victim's fingernails. This was collected because it appeared as if Stephanie had fought back against her killer. When looking at the first loci, you can see that Michelle and Anthony both match the DNA fingerprinting of sample 2. Next, when we look at locus 2, you can see that both Jake and Michelle match sample 2. However, since Michelle is the only one that is consistent between both loci, we can confirm that it was her DNA found under Stephanie's fingernails, which is enough to prove that Stephanie was murdered by Michelle. Also, an important thing to notice is that Blake and Michelle are related. Michelle is Blake's biological mother. Through our understanding of parents and DNA fingerprinting, the children get an allele from both their mother and their father. With that being said, you can see where Blake's allele matches that of Michelle's in both locus 1 and locus 2. That confirms that Michelle is Blake's biological mother. In conclusion, we were able to successfully arrest Michelle, Stephanie's ex-husband's mother, for the murder of Stephanie. The process of DNA fingerprinting as a result of gel electrophoresis was the main determining factor in this case of finding the killer. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week to hear about Happy Hour Turned Dark.